San Francisco's Bay Area is suddenly awash with unemployed technology talent, as the tech giants that sustain much of the region's workforce have moved to cut costs. But can New Zealand's tech scene benefit? And how? I'm joined by Will Mace to discuss this week's shoeshine. Will, you were recently in San Fran for a week or so. What did you find out? What did you see while you were over there?
With my first time in San Francisco, so I took in a few of the sites, the Golden Gate Bridge and otherwise. But it was just really interesting to be there at a time when there's a huge amount of, I suppose, volatility in the tech market. We were just seeing daily, there was a ticker that NBC had on the news that they were just counting up the layoffs as they were coming in each day, wow. news reports and official statements. So, I think I tallied it up at about 26,000 just in the Bay Area.
And Meta was the big one, right? They were
Meta
11,000 or something.
11,000, yeah. And Twitter was up there. Obviously, there, with Elon Musk coming in, there's a sort of a different driver there. But it's especially his statements kind of put a pin in the difficulty that some of those companies are having at the moment, how they're perhaps a little bit bloated and have gotten that way just because everyone in town is kind of doing it and scrambling for talent and looking at valuation and sort of bringing in extra capital, especially at the lower end at inflated valuations. So it seems like that merry-go-round has just stopped a little bit, but I mean, it's not going to kill the economy in Silicon Valley or in California. It's just a bit of a road bump. It's just interesting to think how this might benefit or otherwise New Zealand being, several thousand kilometres away, but we are bigging up for some of that tech talent. So I just thought I'd take a look at that.
So you spoke to a few people on the ground. Why don't you get into what they were telling you?
Yeah, I was there with a company called SAP, and I was talking to a lot of their people. I spoke to Allbirds founder Tim Brown. Sort of those stories have already been published, or Tim Brown profile was earlier last week, But for this story, I sort of delved into my conversation with Randy Commissar, who's a really interesting investor, early Silicon Valley executive with Apple. He was senior counsel for Apple Computer back in the day and did various other things, but he's very well respected. He has a really big soft spot for New Zealand.
He's got pretty strong links here, right?
He does now, yeah. It's sort of, I suppose, about 6 or 7 years, he sort of explained to me how he... it was really disillusioned with San Francisco and the sort of the tech-centric culture that had come out, even though he was sort of part of it at the time with Kleiner Perkins. He sort of saw New Zealand. He looked around the world a little bit and was looking for countries and conditions that might create a sort of a better type of capitalism.
So this isn't just a bolt hole in Queenstown kind of guy. This is actually a full...
He's not even... Yeah, I mean, I don't think he has a bolt hole. He is applying for a visa at the moment, but he's not actually investing here. He is just advising. So he advises Movac, Nuance Capital, NZTE, the government on various things. So it seems like he's coming from the right place, and he's got a really good experience. And he just had some really interesting things to say about, where they went wrong in Silicon Valley and how New Zealand might be able to sort of, I suppose, come from a different place and maybe change the way that, I suppose, the tech sector creates value.
So you've already mentioned you spoke to Tim Brown, obviously gone from New Zealand to San Fran, sort of via London as well, I think, in parts. You also spoke to, what's his name, Mika Gabriels?
Yeah.
So he's set up in San Fran now?
He has, yeah. Actually spelt Mika, but pronounced Misha. So I'll give you that one. He's got a company called Movin', and, sort of established it here, but about 6 months ago decided to move to San Francisco. And uprooted his family, his young family. He said it hasn't been the easiest move, but it kind of had to be done. More so for the, he's there for the access to capital and all of those things, but actually being in San Francisco, his company sort of helps with infrastructure, construction, maintenance. It really helps consultancies and infrastructure owners sort of manage their projects more carefully. So being in San Francisco and California, in a place where there's so much infrastructure and it's also not in the best shape, San Francisco is also quite constrained geographically, he said. So it's really for him to be in that close proximity to a market that his business is really, is trying to get. But obviously the talent and the capital that is available there is second to none. And he's talked about, with these layoffs that are going through, being able to pick up some really good talent that are coming out of some of the bigger companies. He's super excited because he's just in a hiring phase at the moment. That's kind of going the other way, I suppose, and taking Kiwi values to America. So there's a bit of a cultural exchange going on. I think it's going to benefit both countries.
So in your view, should we be doing everything we can to get some of this tech talent to New Zealand? We've discussed before some of the different pathways that exist already, but I mean, what could be done to try and accelerate this?
Yeah, I have banged on a little bit about the Global Impact Visa and the Edmund Hillary Fellowship and the Investor Visa, and I just think perhaps more needs to be done. The government here has, made the Investor Visa criteria more active, so people can't just invest in government bonds and get an investor visa here. So that's a really good step. The Global Impact Visa is actually on a bit of a suspension at the moment because it came through with this Edmund Hillary Fellowship, which I've written about before. The pilot phase of that has ended, and therefore so has the Global Impact Visa, which provides a really interesting pathway for people who perhaps aren't necessarily investors. They're not wealthy, but they can provide, and they might not have job offers here, but they can provide really interesting perspectives for New Zealand. So I think, with the correct assessment on how that visa's gone over the past few years, I think the government should be really looking to get that back up and running, especially when you've got a ready market of tech people coming out of the US and perhaps looking at New Zealand favourably.
Interesting stuff. Well, that's this week's Shoeshine. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, mate.